So, Andrew, tell us please about a little bit of your history and how you grew up and your story.
Sure, absolutely. So, as you can tell, I'm of Indian origin. So I was born in a small, you don't have to remember this town, a small town called Kapurthala, which is on the foothills of the Himalaya mountains. And I was born to a family that was, it's hard to define what poverty is, but I can tell you, you've never seen poverty. So we grew up in a very, very humble environment to a point where, I had three sisters, and it was an extended family system. So I actually lived with my uncles and aunts. So, it was an interesting thing. My dad was a military guy, so 11 months out of the year, he was out at wars with Pakistan and China, because India and China were at odds, and India and Pakistan were at odds. So he was always gone. But I never felt like my dad was gone, because my uncles were my little dads and my greater dads. They could discipline me just like my dad did, and so we kind of grew up in this 14 by 14 room where there were 16 of us, and in that one room we slept, ate, everything was there. We didn't have any electric power, no indoor plumbing. If you wanted to go to the bathroom, you just went out into the fields, and the pigs that were roaming around cleaned up after you. So that was the system, So, but I do want to expand on some of those things, because they taught me a lot. But so in this room, the room, if you've ever slept on a mud floor, one thing you'll notice is that the dust kind of clings to you or rises to the air, So we had a solution for that. So what we used to do is we would follow cattle when they were walking around, and we would actually gather the cow dung and bring it back home and actually smear the dirt floor, because when cow dung dries, it seals the dirt. And so you're sleeping on a floor that's very comfortable, because the dust particles aren't rising, So it kind of sealed it, But what people don't know too is that cow dung also burns very well, And so we were in a society where we couldn't afford firewood, because we cooked over an open fire. We couldn't afford firewood, so we would actually make cow dung patties, and when they dried, they really burned well. But the interesting thing is, the spirit of entrepreneurism was built into me at that age, because my cousins and I would follow the cattle around, and when they did their business, we would all rush and fight over the cow dung. We'd bring it back home, and we'd use what we needed to seal our floor and for the fireplace. But then the rest of it we'd sell to the neighbors, etc. And so so when you're wondering if you're going to have a meal that day, you become very resourceful, and you become, that entrepreneur spirit comes out in you to say, how can I make some money to feed each other, etc. And so that's the environment that I was raised up, But my dad was a very opportunistic guy. He was in the military, as I said, and in 1969, this is a little bit of history. There was a small country in Africa, in southern Africa, called Northern Rhodesia, which was getting its independence from the British. And they renamed the country Zambia. And so Zambia expelled all the British soldiers because they wanted their own soldiers. And so they went to India looking for skilled military personnel to come and help them develop their defense force. And one of those people recruited was my dad, And so this is where boldness comes in. Now, if you're familiar with Zambia, Africa, and India, this is two continents apart, culturally, in every way different. But he decided that he was going to leave the Indian Army after 20 years and take this opportunity, and he actually moved to Zambia on his own first, then the rest of the family. And the reason he did that was there was a financial opportunity there. He was making $300 a year in India, and this gave him an opportunity to make $3,000 a year. So it was a tenfold increase. And so he took advantage of that. And so we moved to Zambia, and he later brought the family over. So I finished up high school there, and I was fortunate that there was a family in Zambia that was a neighbor of mine that actually taught at a small college here, not too far from here, Messiah College. And he said, why don't you apply to Messiah? And you do the math. The tuition at that time was $4,000 a year. My dad was making $3,000 a year. How do you go to college? And but the college was good. They said, Andrew, bring your energy, bring your cultural background, share with the community here on campus, and if you do that, we'll find work opportunities for you, so you don't have to depend on your parents. And I said that's a good deal, and so I decided to come to Messiah. And I knew immediately when I got to Messiah that school wasn't for me, And but the interesting thing was, the most I received from that college environment was really the ability to build relationships with people, how to interact with people, it developed my emotional IQ, because I spent a lot of time with students and faculty, etc. My favorite faculties were always the faculty members who had actually had real life experience. I remember there was a gentleman, Professor Eric Orkey, in addition to being on the faculty, he ran a roofing company in New Jersey. And so I loved listening to him because so when he taught organizational business management, he had practical experiences. There was another gentleman, Dr. Steve Musser. He had a consulting firm, and he did personnel consulting for the old AMP, which is today Tyco. And so he always talked about real life exam, and I picked up a lot. So it wasn't the textbook stuff that I needed. What I needed is being in that environment to really develop my emotional IQ, my interpersonal skills, my relationship building skills, because what I find now, and I found later on, is those are the skill sets that have a premium associated with them, So that's how I got to Messiah. I met my wife there. We've been married 36 years, have 5 children. They all went to Northern High School. I know there's some Northern folks here. And 2 of them are in Dallas, Texas now. 3 of them are here, and I'm here. I've been in the banking business. I've been fortunate that, I started in banking, and I forgot to mention to you, my dad wanted me to be an accountant, and wanted me to go to college, and that's why I did it. But I really didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be an accountant, but I didn't want to disappoint him. But I went there. But while I was in college, I kind of knew that, one thing I enjoyed was doing things in creative ways. I was always looking for different ways to do things. So when I started my banking career, I spent 10 years with a bank, and after those 10 years, I was very secure. I was a vice president, making good money. I've got 5 kids, so things were stable. And but there was that itch, and I kept saying to our bank, you're missing the opportunities. If we did things differently, you could do this, you could do that. We could take advantage of this, etc. And they would always just nod their head and say, look, just keep quiet and do what you're doing. And I finally decided that I needed to take a bold step. And so what I did was, I quit that and joined another bank, which was a fledgling bank, but I knew that I could make a difference there, that my creative ideas would be accepted. And so I joined that company, which was the old Harris Savings Bank. John, you probably know them, So a friend of mine who had just become the CEO said, why don't you join me? But let me tell you something, you got to start, we're going to have to redo this whole company. And I said, that's what I love. That's what I want. I want a clean sheet that we can work from. And so we grew that company to about $5.5 billion. And so we had created a lot of value with that. And so we sold that company to Santander, and they're now today Santander. That was a $850 million transaction, and I love that, you know what I mean, and building. So we sold that, and after that, I decided to start a bank from scratch, you know, and so we started a company called Greystone Bank, and 35 employees, and I left, you know, so there was no salary, there was no guarantee of a job because it was a startup. We didn't even know if the regulators were. But, you know, those bold steps always pay off, you know. And so we built that company to about $3 billion and sold that to Susquehanna. But part of the deal with Susquehanna when we sold it was that I would become CEO of Susquehanna Bank. And so, you know, so now that was about a $400 million transaction. And then we merged with Susquehanna, and then we sold Susquehanna to BB&T, which was a $2 billion transaction. So, but that's what entrepreneurship is about, you know, is being bold, is stepping out there, being confident in your ideas, and frankly, that was one of the reasons I wrote this book, and I'll get to that. Mike, am I taking up too much time?
How are we looking on time? I don't want to have to pay the $15 surcharge. No, this is great.
Okay.
Please.
So you know, so after we sold the company to BB&T, you know, I decided to move down to Florida where I knew nobody, and part of it was I had a non-compete in central Pennsylvania, so I had to work outside of PA, and I didn't know anybody in Tampa, but a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, Andrew, there's this really little bank that has not made $1 of investment in their bank since 1954. You know, the carpets there are still from 1954, okay? When you walk on them, dust particles rise, you know? So they said, but they need help. And I thought about you because he said, look, most seasoned bankers aren't going to do this, but you're an entrepreneur, you love stuff like this, you know, you love rebuilding and et cetera. And I said, absolutely, you know, and so he said, you know, why don't we go in, recapitalize this bank and build it? And I said, sure, let's do that. So I went down there, didn't know anybody in the Tampa area, but got to know people, et cetera. And that's why I go back to, you know, what did I learn in college? It was relationship building skills, you know, and so I kind of used that and built a whole network in Tampa. The bank that I went to had 5 branches, and when I left 3 years later, we had 18 branches coast to coast from Tampa to Melbourne. We had grown to about $1 billion. We were the 11th largest bank in Florida, and as an entrepreneur, somebody knocked on our door and was willing to pay a phenomenal price for it, so we went ahead and sold that on January 1st, 2018. And this is where it gets interesting because as an entrepreneur, you know, at that time I was 56, and I had every intention of just saying, I'll just hang out at the beach, etc. And we closed the deal January 1st, 2018 at 12:01 a.m. January 2nd at 3 p.m., I looked at my wife and I said, I cannot do this, you know. Katie, does that sound like Mike, you know?
Very familiar.
I said, I can't do this. And my wife said, what do you mean? I said, you know, I don't have a schedule. My head's not spinning. Ideas aren't floating. I just feel like what am I doing? And so she said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I've done so many banks. I don't want to do a bank for the sake of a bank. You know, I'm 56 years old. And so as my wife and I prayed about it, one thing that became very clear to me was, you know, I felt like create a bank, but unlike in the past where you built it and you built it very successfully and sold it, build a bank with 3 areas of focus. One is one that gives back to the community in a big way. You know, and so we built this bank, headquartered here in Camp Hill, for Central PA, with a specific purpose to say, look, when we stop making money, there's a certain percentage we want to give back to the community and influence the community and help the community grow and take care of the needs in our community. The second thing we wanted to do was develop the next generation of leaders. And that's why, you know, when Mike said, you know, about 160M and his heart, I was like, you know what, I am so interested in impacting the next generation of leaders and helping them be successful. Because if we don't do that, there's global economic impact, not just nationally, but globally, and so it's important that we develop the next generation of leaders. So that was an important thing. So to give you an idea, the company we started, over 90% of our employees are under 40, a very young group, and that's intentional. Because that's the next generation. They're the ones we want to pour into, we want to coach, we want to mentor, because they're going to be the leaders of the future, And then the third thing was to really impact our industry. I'm a banker. I see the value of community banking and what community banking can do for a community. Because frankly, if you think about it, most of our nation is small businesses, mom and dad operations, and their primary source of capital to grow is community banks, and so banks are very important. And so part of this is we're building technology with this company that will help community banks be survivors as we go forward. So that's kind of my story, and part of this process was I did write a book, and it really is catered towards the folks that I see in this room, and it talks a lot about the American dream. What is the American dream? The American dream is success, is fulfillment, is living a purpose-filled life. And this book talks about how, don't focus on, I want to make a boatload of money. Focus on a purpose that you really believe in, because good things happen when you believe in something. Ideas spew out, etc. And guess what? Before you know it, you'll make a lot of money, but the purpose can't be just make money. The purpose has to be greater. And the greater purpose is really, how do I impact people? How do I impact my community? And if you focus on that, the financial side will come. And that's what this book talks about. It's for folks like you, because I found, my biggest skill set wasn't my college degree. In fact, my GPA was 2.2. And
not bad.
Yeah, that's yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Passing.
I thought it was good. Yeah.
But the thing, but I want you to realize that it's the intangibles. It's not. Look, when I talk to candidates, etc., I never ask for your degree or anything like that. It's more, I spend 5 minutes with them, and I know, do they have energy? Can they make eye contact? Do they seem engaged? Are they passionate about anything? You know what I mean? Because some people, you got to check if there's a pulse there, And that's, so, those are the traits that you're looking for. And this book talks about the value of persistence. Like, for example, my biggest asset is not my college degree. My biggest asset is I am very persistent. When I put my mind to something, I want to make it happen. So, for example, when we said we're going to do Link Bank, and here's the purpose behind it, guess what? It is going to happen. It is going to happen. Doesn't mean there aren't challenges. There aren't, situations where you're like, am I really doing what I need? No, they will come, but you overcome those challenges because you're persistent, you know what I mean? So I talk about the value of persistence. I talk about focus. We're all kind of glued to our phones, and we can be there for hours. I have a discipline where I say, I love sports. But I tell myself, you get half an hour a day to look at sports scores and keep up with your sports. But because if I don't limit it to half an hour, before I know it, that's where I'm spending time, and I'm not growing my business, etc. So there's that discipline. I love sports, but you got to be disciplined about it. So it talks about focus, The persistent one, I want to come back to. How many of you know that, Hershey Foods, founded by Milton Hershey, you know how many times he filed bankruptcy? Four times. But he kept getting up with the same product. He kept getting up, And what is it today? You know what I mean? And so, there are examples that we've seen before us, and we just need to apply those things. So it's not your diploma or your GPA in college or high school or anything like that. It's these intangibles that are in you But we have to ask ourselves, what am I passionate about? And then how do I bring it to the forefront? So I apologize. I only have a few copies, but you're welcome to have one. So whoever comes first can have them. But you can get them on Amazon. The first week it was out, it became a bestseller in the business ethics category right away. But it's on. You can get an electronic version too. It's only 99 cents because for me it wasn't about money, but getting it into the hands of young people so that they can begin to apply some of those principles. But they're documented here for you.
It's a great read. It's a great read, and I think it's interesting to look. It's our American dream.
That's right.
Right? It's not my American dream, it's our American dream. So Andrew opened the arms to a lot of us have this same dream from different corners of the world. And
that's right.
Andrew, would you share with everybody your experience with going to work at LB's and then...
Absolutely. One of the things that I look back on is, every opportunity gave me a chance to learn something, So I'll give you an example. So I graduated from college. Okay, 1984, economy's bad, not many jobs available. I got a wife and a kid to take care of. So, so I ended up working the night shift at LB's Big Boy. Many of you don't remember that, but it's like a Denny's, But I was a night shift manager, 11 to 7, And I'm going in there thinking, my gosh, I spent 4 years in freaking college. And I'm going to be running the night shift here at Denny's. Is this what I did this for? But so I went there, and my job was to motivate the waiters and waitresses, the busboys, the cooks, etc. But it was interesting. That's where I learned to lead. That's where I learned my best skills. Because think about it, at 2 a.m. when all the drunks come in, imagine trying to motivate a busboy with these people that are thrown up all over the place, you know what I mean? Think about it, But so if you can do that, I started to look at that as, my gosh, what am I doing here with a college degree with all this debt, etc. But the reality was that I was in that place to learn, and that's where I really learned to inspire a team, how to get people to put out, in that environment. So that's why I would encourage you, every opportunity that you're in, look at it as an opportunity, not as, my gosh, what am I doing here, etc. No, there's something you're going to pick up that's going to come back to help you as you go forward. So my ability to manage and lead did not come because I went to Wharton Business School or Harvard Graduate School or anything like that. It was on the job. That's where I learned how to inspire these folks, you know what I mean? So that's, you keep that at the back of your mind. Every opportunity that you're in, there's something that you're going to take away that makes you who you are eventually, So.
And then a few short years later, when Andrew was really rolling in the banking community, his team went back and bought that property.
Yes.
That was interesting,
Okay,
I thought.
so here's that was my first job. So this LB's Big Boy was at the corner of Hartsdale and Old Gettysburg Pike. Where the Bonton is right across the street. There's a bank there now, Santander. Okay, that was the LB's restaurant. So I worked there, and then it must have been like 10 years later, I ended up acquiring that property, the LB's, retrofitting that building into a bank called Waypoint Financial, and which is now Santander, But that's why, so you don't plan. Do you think when I was a trainee running that night shift, I thought that one day that would be converted to a bank under my direction? Never did. But things come back. But this is where. Some of you may be looking at that and say, well, you're fortunate, you're lucky. No, there's no such thing. You make it happen. That happened because I wanted it to happen and I worked towards it. And that's, I would really encourage you, put your mind to that. If you put your mind to something, be persistent about it, So.